Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my podcast series devoted to the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. Please don't forget to like what you hear and hit subscribe. I have such sights to show you. The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1939. Following his rejuvenating effect on one franchise as the Baron in Son of Frankenstein, Basil Rathbone began another by going straight into this excellent adaptation of Conan Doyle's most famous Sherlock Holmes story, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Not only has this tale become the most filmed version over the decades, Rathbone and Nigel Bruce as his doctor sidekick Watson are arguably the most well-known pairing of the duo on film, making a total of 13 films between 1939 to 1946. Rathbone gives Holmes a precision and authority, coupled with a hint of more warmth than his creator bestowed on him, to humanize what would otherwise be an intellectual remoteness difficult for audiences to take to. Some fans of Conan Doyle have been critical of Bruce's slightly woolly duffer of a sidekick, taking issue with an interpretation that doesn't reflect his battle-hardened background as an ex-military assistant surgeon, wounded in the field, nor credits him overly with undoubted intelligence. However, Bruce is an avuncular, personable contrast to Holmes, and represents the audience in needing to have the lightning-fast superhuman deductions of Holmes explained along the way. His is also more of a rounded character than the enigmatic narrator function Watson has in the original stories. 20th Century Fox mounted the Hound with decent sets and a quality cast, while commendably cleaving to the Victorian era in which the story is set, instead of the then modern setting as previous versions presented. Working with a script by Ernest Pascal, the director, Sidney Lanfield, was an ex-vaudeville performer and jazz musician who transferred his light touch to directing comedies for the studio through the 30s. After this most successful film of his, in the 40s he went on to helm the Fred Astaire vehicle You'll Never Get Rich and a string of popular comedies with fellow ex-vaudevillian Bob Hope. The plot concerns the arrival back to British shores of Sir Henry Baskerville from Canada, who is to take up his inheritance of Devonshire's Baskerville estate, providing he can live long enough to enjoy it. In advance of his visit, Lionel Atwill makes a welcome appearance as Dr. Mortimer, friend to Sir Henry's late uncle, who unburdens his fears to Holmes and Watson that the family curse of the Hound of the Baskervilles will see Sir Henry savaged by the ferocious dog on the moors that first killed Sir Hugo Baskerville, Ralph Forbes, centuries before, told to us in flashback. The curse is said to take the lives of all successive heirs to the estate. In real life, as I've already covered in previous podcasts, Atwill was to find within the next year that he would be cursed himself by the ruinous sex scandal that would subsequently wreck his career. Richard Green is a pleasant enough, handsome Sir Henry, and here capitalized on his heartthrob status as a Fox star that would later make him famous on TV in The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1955 to 59. He actually took top billing in the film over Rathbone, since the studio at first had no idea how popular the Sherlock Holmes series would become. Wendy Barry, notable as a romantic leading lady of the period, was credited above Nigel Bruce as Sir Henry's love interest Beryl Stapleton. The pacing is good, and the moors are impressively realized with a realistic depth of perspective and atmospheric layering of fog. We also benefit from a suitably fierce, fang-bearing Great Dane as the titular hound. Aside from Atwill, another horror alumnus, fleetingly seen as a cruel hunter hounding Karloff in a different sense in Bride of Frankenstein, is John Carradine as Barrymore the butler, changed from Barrymore for the film to avoid comparisons with John Barrymore. He would make his mark in horror movies across future decades in a hugely prolific career of roughly 350 credits. Intriguingly, for those new fans unfamiliar with this particular tale, Holmes vanishes for the whole of the middle act on the pretense of being too busy. He does, however, accord us an enjoyable cameo of his and Rathbone's character acting skills when he pops up in the vivid guise of a travelling old Devonshire hawker of musical instruments. It's worth taking a moment to explore why was Holmes absent for such a large chunk of his own adventure. Well, because it was never intended to be based around him. For the last 8 years, Conan Doyle had literally left Holmes for dead. He had killed off his master detective in spectacular fashion, tumbling him off Switzerland's Reichenbach Falls in a final grapple with his arch-enemy Professor Moriarty in The Final Problem in 1893. The author's reasons were somewhat complex. Conan Doyle had been harboring a grudge against his most famous creation for some time. Whilst he enjoyed the fantastic sums publishers were paying him to feed more Holmes cases to his hungry audience, his ego was starving. Holmes's fame had eclipsed that of his creator, and he was not happy about it. The author's fan mail was dominated by inquiries about and even letters to the master detective, asking for help, as many people believed Holmes was a real person. More importantly, Conan Doyle couldn't shake the feeling that these crime capers were lowbrow. He confided by letter to his mother that, "I must save my mind for better things, even if it means I must bury my pocketbook with him." He desperately wanted to be admired as a serious novelist, from his other books such as The White Company, of which he was much prouder. Yet his judgment of what his audiences would like only seemed to fire on all cylinders when Holmes was involved. It didn't help when a revered writer friend, Robert Louis Stevenson, inadvertently offended Conan Doyle by writing to say how much he liked the Holmes stories, as a distraction from toothache. Conan Doyle inserted the famous sleuth into the Hound of the Baskervilles reluctantly to facilitate the solving of this Gothic Victorian mystery, and got around the awkward matter of his seeming demise by retrofitting the timeline to make the case happen 2 years before the Reichenbach Falls. It wasn't until 1905 that he finally addressed the fate-death revelation with an all-new comeback series of 13 stories, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, thus hugely satisfying his bank account and fan base, if not his artistic muse. Back to the plot, and eventually we discover that the curse is nothing more than a ruse cooked up by the family's dastardly cousin Stapleton, played by Morton Lowry, who had trained the killer dog to help him dispatch all the other heirs in his master plan to gain an unfettered claim on the estate's title. He flees across the moors, which we learn from Holmes won't help him as there are alerted police lying in wait. Lowry would return near the end of the series in another role as a steward in the sea-going pursuit to Algiers. The Hound of the Baskervilles is ultimately a solid way to let loose the dogs of a long-running and highly successful franchise. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you've just heard, don't forget to click so, and please hit subscribe. If you build it, they will come.